Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. On every episode, Dave and his guests explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Welcome, everyone. You're listening to Clarity from Chaos, and I'm your host, Dave Campbell. If you're new to the show and like what you hear and want to support the show, go out to my website on Substack at clarityfromchaos.substack.com and go out to the subscribe button and click it to support the show. We're very, very much appreciate it if you could do that. Also, while you're there, you can see the upcoming guests and look at the archives that are part of the show. But before we get into this edition of Clarity, I would like to share a few thoughts. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, American Marxists have been waiting to unleash their version of social justice with things like CRT, woke, cancel culture, etc. They have been successful in rewriting history, reintroducing racism, creating the concept of privileged classes, and determining what can be said in public discourse, the military, and even our houses of worship. These radicals are hell-bent on destroying our country and are doing so because it was founded on a Judeo-Christian idea, and they can't stand it. We need to stop thinking in terms, though, of Democrat, Republican, global elites, and corporate media as adversaries and start thinking more biblical. We need to bring the church and the Bible back into our lives, and we need to speak these people spiritually. And the ones that we do elect need to answer to a higher authority and not the puppet masters they answer to today. Now, with that said, I would like to share a Bible verse, if you don't mind, and this is from Isaiah 41, verses 10 through 13. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my victorious right hand. Behold, all who are incensed against you shall be put to shame and confounded. Those who strive against you shall be as nothing and shall perish. You shall seek those that contend with you, but shall not find them. Those who war against you shall be as nothing at all. For I, the Lord your God, your right hand, it is I who say to you, fear not, I will help you. We are incredibly pleased to welcome back to this show the author of Land Rich, Cash Poor, My Family's Hope, and the Untold Story of the Disappearing American Farmer, Mr. Brian Reisinger. In addition, Land Rich, Cash Poor has won the Year Award from the Farm Foundation. Brian is a frequent guest on Fox News, CNN, and Newsmax, as well as a contributor to USA Today, Newsweek, and Real Clear Politics on issues facing farmers today. Welcome to the show, Brian.
It's good to be with you, David. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for everything you do to highlight these issues.
You bet. So let's start with the current government and the agencies affecting the farm community. What's that look like today? Because I know there's been a lot of turmoil around it.
Yeah, there has. For a while we had this government shutdown that was going on because of some political games going on in Washington. And,
Right.
what that meant is that farmers who may or may not want to have what they do every day have anything to do with the government, they have to deal with the government. There's certain things they got to do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They got to go down to the county farm service agency office to register crops. There's different things they're required to do. They weren't able to do those things because of the shutdown. The bigger thing that was even exacerbated more is there were debates around trade assistance. If we're going to have tariffs and negotiations that the federal government says, hey, this is going to affect our farmers. There were packages that were supposed to be working their way through the wheels of government to be able to be there, and they couldn't be there because of the shutdown. And so in addition to that inconvenience factor, there was a real impact on farmers in the middle of harvest who were supposed to be getting some sort of trade assistance to offset the fact that they were, facing some of that short-term pain that the administration said was necessary for those tougher deals. So there was a lot of mess and problems going on throughout the harvest season this fall.
Yeah, I know. I just saw today that as part of the China negotiations, they have bought a considerable amount of soybeans. And I saw that Trump announced today a $12 billion farm rescue package, which I assume is what you're talking about. The relief that the farmers were looking for prior to these knuckleheads shutting the government down.
That's
Is
exactly
that pretty
right.
much?
You
Yeah.
said it
Okay.
exactly right.
So where do you think that's going to land? Do you think that's actually going to push through right now? And forgive me, Brian, but I don't see our government really doing much of anything except bitching back and forth. I don't see any real work for what I would consider quote of the country, except for maybe Trump's personality. I don't see anybody doing anything except arguing that one person is more wrong than the other person.
Yeah. The ideal would be that if we're going to, whether it's going to be tariffs that we're going to have to make tougher negotiations with countries, or whether it's, something that's going to be done with federal money, the ideal would be that people are working together to figure out, hey, here's a principle we can all get behind. Let's go ahead and find a solution. That's not the world we live in, right? And so where we're at
Yeah.
right now is the money that they're talking about releasing is money that the USDA has the ability to move forward. And so, it means that that step is being taken. But to your point, all the big things that we'd want to do in this country, like let's say you want to tackle, hey, let's reform how our government programs interact with our farmers. Let's say that,
Yeah.
whether you're right, left, or in between, inside farming, outside farming, everybody's got something they hate about these government programs. And we're not doing the hard work, rolling up our sleeves and dealing with that, for example.
Right. Yeah. There doesn't seem to be any kind of urgency around taking care of the farmers. We've had this huge push by China to start acquiring, farmable land, and then you compound that with the corporate push to, start pushing out the small farmers and stuff like that. It's got to be a pretty scary business at this point, Brian, of being a farmer at all. So kind of, I know you're tied directly back to the family farm. So what's the sense with the farmers out there? Because it's got to be a scary time for those people.
It really is. I think what it really boils down to when I think about our family, but when I also talk to other farmers back where I'm from and across the country, it boils down to, I think people feel like family farms are not put first. They're really put last.
No.
And this is
Right.
a decades long problem, right? But whether it's the government programs we're talking about, whether it's the subsidies, whether the farmer wants to receive them or not, and whether it's, trade deals going back to the 90s, whatever the case, usually that family farm is near the back of the line as opposed to the front of the line. And the problem that we have is that just contributes in all kinds of ways over the decades to the loss of our farmers. We've lost 45,000 a year for the past century. That means we've lost 70% of our farms. If we want to do something about that, you got to be able to save those family farms, those medium and small farms, as well as the larger family farms. You got to be able to change these trends if we're going to do something. And meantime, not only are we losing farms, but our food's getting more expensive and less healthy. It's affecting our national security, all these different issues that you've done a great job of covering in your show.
Yeah, I was sitting there looking at the numbers, Brian, and the decline of the farm has been what I think the numbers, at least that I was looking at, was they peaked out kind of in 1935, and they've been declining since, and rapidly since 82. They've been going down. And right now, they're down almost 10% of what was out there in the census of 2017. So they continue to decrease. And I know people have been talking about the Chinese acquiring farmable land, but I haven't seen anything unless it's on the state level. And I haven't followed all the different states, but I haven't seen anything federally that tells them to back the hell off. You're not going to be buying our property.
Yeah.
So
You're right about that. There's been talk about legislation, but as far as actual action, it's been hard to come by.
yeah,
And, there are some states that have explored taking legal action, like their attorney general, things like that. I mean, that's interesting. But we need a much more widespread series of solutions. And the reality is that, the amount of farmland owned by foreign interests went up by double digits in 2 years. And you'll have people out there, and I think there's validity to this. People in the industry, they will say, hey, look, there's a certain thing as friendly investment from foreign countries in certain agriculture industries, and then there's foreign adversaries. And there are some people who are afraid about doing something about the China thing and making it so that an agriculture industry couldn't get friendly investment. Well, the answer to that is transparency. Let's have transparency, and let's be clear about who our adversaries are, and that we don't want our adversaries buying farmland. That can be separate from all the other types of friendly investment that you might want to get. So we need that transparency, and that's the problem. We don't have it right now.
Yeah, it seems to me and that if we understand that they have a stranglehold on the supply chain for, say, pharmaceuticals, which was evident back through COVID and everything else, and there's been a big push on not only bringing the pharmaceutical manufacturing back in within our shores, but rare earth minerals and so on and so forth. But there hasn't been any substantive discussion about taking back this farmland and getting the farmers where they can. I know that the tax bill helped farmers probably on their big ticket purchases, obviously combines, tractors, such, but that seems to be just a tip of what is needed, really.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, here's what we need to do. We need to, they've been year after year kind of punting, kicking that farm bill can
Right.
down the road, if you will. And
Yeah.
the recent one that they did was kind of an extension of the existing bill. And here's what happens when we don't pass a farm bill that's that long-term 5-year bill, or when we pass something that's really just an extension of most of the existing programs, we're not rolling up our sleeves and reforming government, right? So ever since, actually, you said it, 1935, that era when we started losing farms like that, that's also the era that in the Great Depression we had a lot of these farm programs born. And the reality is that we haven't really done serious reforms to those programs on a deep level ever since. So we've been piling up programs, 90 years now?
Yeah.
And it's one after another. And here's what happens. And your listeners who are skeptical of government know this, but look, I mean, the natural thing that happens is you don't know which ones are working and which ones aren't. You get programs that are contradictory to one another. And then the other thing that happens is government programs become prone to favoritism and abuse over time. So you got all these problems. What we need is a bipartisan family farm moonshot to say which of these programs are working the way they're supposed to, which ones aren't.
Yeah. Um, with Lee Zeldin in the EPA, is that backed off any for the conservation issues that the farmers were running headfirst into?
Yeah, it's helped some. I mean, every administration has their things they do well and their things that are more challenging. One of the things is that the environmental regulations have not put quite as much pressure. I mean, there's still the inertia of what was going on with our federal government, and there's also the issue of what's already in place. But we don't have an EPA that is working as hard at making it more difficult for farmers to afford a living. And I always say to people, look, that's not a partisan statement. Farmers are some of the best conservationists as far as caring about the
Sure.
land, right? The
Well,
soil, the water.
well, if you understand, Brian, where the hell your food comes from, and the fact that you would be an absolute idiot farmer to ruin your revenue generator, right? Yeah, I mean, you'd be an absolute idiot, right?
That's it. That's it. And that's why, farmers can be outstanding partners in conservation efforts. When we get
Sure.
people who care about our environment and our family farmers, particularly family farmers together, you can solve all kinds of problems. Hey, let's have this local project that, pertains to this watershed. Let's work on soil health. A lot of these things, cover crops, regenerative agriculture. But when that's not the approach we take, and what we take is we have people who care about the environment or groups who say they do, and maybe they're exploiting people who care about the environment. But when they're attacking farmers, unfortunately, we're turning an opportunity for collaboration into just hammering on an industry that's already on the edge of survival.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to the water issues in California through the big farming areas there in Central California, and it's just shameful what they've done out there. And then obviously, the whole water problem, went up went up literally in smoke with the Palisades fire.
Yeah.
But nobody seems to be addressing it, and everybody just kind of seems to turn a blind eye to it. And it's not until people start having to pay double for their eggs or their milk or their cheese or their whatever that they actually start paying. But then they don't walk that problem back to see what the cause is, right? It was just like the bird flu thing. It wasn't until RFK Jr. came in and basically said, you don't need to be killing all these damn birds, right? That's not going to solve the issue. And once they implemented that, that whole bird flu thing kind of went away. So it's just, I guess it's discouraging that there's not more dialogue around it, you know?
Yeah, you just hit on the foundational issue, which is we have policymakers who don't understand the impact between what's happening on our farms and what happens to our food. First of all, they don't understand what's going on the ground on our farms and the impact their policies have on the farms in the
No,
first place. But
no.
even if they did, the connection between wiping out our farms, making it harder for our farmers to make a living, and how that affects our food is something they don't see. And you just hit on the perfect example. Bird flu is an example. COVID was a really big example of this across the board. And actually, beef has been an example more recently, which is to say, we've got a vulnerable supply chain, right? We've been losing for decades farms, and we've also been losing a lot of companies between farms and where people get their food. And these industries have been concentrating. And so when you get more concentrated industries and larger market shares, look, at the end of the day, you have one great big distribution center go down for eggs, say, all of a sudden
Right,
the price of eggs is
right.
up. And if you've got something like bird flu effect in a facility like that, it has an outsized impact on our supply. The answer is to have family farms of all sizes, small, medium, and large, able to provide food to more people in more ways. And we can't do that as long as we're wiping our farms out. So the price of food is going to continue to spike. It's going to continue to go up overall. And that's in addition to the concerns that people have about the health of the food and any other reason that people care about where the food comes from.
Well, and I think people just don't have they don't have an understanding or a respect for what it takes to put milk on the table. They just don't. And it's not communicated well anywhere, except for, if you go to a farming community or something, and probably in the schools there where the kids actually have hands-on knowledge. But if you go to a major city, they think milk just comes from the grocery store.
That's right.
They can't back it up, all the way all the way to the cow and what it takes to get that, right?
That's absolutely right. Forgive me if I've told you this joke before. I try to have a little bit of humor with the people that I deal with who have so much lack of knowledge about where their food comes from. I say, hey, look, even growing up on a farm, I thought the chocolate milk came from the brown cows. I had misunderstandings myself, And
Sure.
the reality is that we just have, whether it's policymakers or whether consumers, they're so much further away from the farmyards and the fields where their food is grown and raised. And that's the challenge that is so fundamental to all this.
Right. Well, I think it suffers from, there was the big mass migration during the industrial age to get away from the family farm, because very much like, the women's movement where they made it despicable to be a housewife, they've done the same kinds of things to farmers, right? They consider them huckleberries, right? They have no idea, no bloody clue of the science and the technology of bringing corn to market, or bringing soybeans, or raising beef, or anything else. They just consider it, below them, I guess. I'm not quite sure where the issue is, Brian. And I don't, the only way to solve it is to just have more national dialogue around it, right?
Yeah.
But they don't seem to. And it's like healthcare, for God's sake. These idiots don't know anything about healthcare, yet they came up with the Obama with the ACA thing, which has been a terrible deal. And you had these same morons making policy for farmers.
Yeah. I think that one of the biggest things we can do is recognize how far our country's drifted. And you're absolutely right. It's a function of the shift of our economy from rural to urban. And we've lost economic activity in rural areas. We've lost population from rural to urban areas. And that's gone so far that it's created this rural-urban divide. And there's a lot of discussion around that. But what I mean by that is, look, not everybody, but most people in a rural area, they're voting this direction. And then you got most everybody in an urban area voting this direction. And what that means is, you have these divides where populations understand half the issue. People in rural areas understand what's going on to our farms and the effect it's having on our food. People in urban areas aren't really in a position to know, and their elected officials certainly don't know. So you got elected officials that are not only split between Republicans and Democrats, but split between rural and urban, and people don't have the full solution. So if we had urban politicians who understood, hey, this inner city neighborhood that you're worried about their food access, that ties back to what's going on with our farms, and vice versa. The people who are concerned about our farms, they don't have the support in Congress from someone on the other side of the aisle to help solve it and fix it. And it took people from all different parts of the country and all different walks of life to mess this up. It's going to take all of us focusing on where our food
Right.
comes from to fix it.
Yep, absolutely. I was just sitting here thinking several years ago, there was a big push for the urban farm, right? To take all the undeveloped land and start putting raised beds on it and growing vegetables and stuff like that. But that kind of came and went. Is there a lobby or something, Brian, that is maybe doing some of the heavy lifting on this? Or how is that working? Because it seems to me that the farmers are just so little represented, that there almost needs to be a unionization or something around the whole issue.
Yeah. There are groups out there that lobby for farmers on the Farm Bureau, National Farmers Organization.
Yeah.
They don't get as involved as policy as they used to, but Farm Bureau still does. The Farmers Union, and here's one of the issues that we have. One of the issues we have is there's so many different types of agriculture. A lot of times they get split up along different industry sectors, and then even within that, your average farmer can end up falling to the back of the line alongside all the other economic interests. I was talking to someone with trade deals the other day, and this isn't specific to this administration, going back over time, going back in the 90s. Like when you make these trade deals, as an example for you, you're not only balancing farming, but you're balancing mining and rare minerals and,
Mhm.
manufacturing and all these other issues. So agriculture is, let's say, one of just under a simple situation, one of 10 big industry sectors. Then within agriculture, you got all these different agriculture sectors. And then within that, you got the agribusinesses and the marketers versus the actual farmer. So by the time you get down to the farmer, it's very easy for that farmer to be at the absolute back of a very long line, even if the stated goal of a trade deal is farming. And that's just a function of how things have worked, since the 1990s or earlier, NAFTA, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think the other part of it is farmers just in general pay more attention to what they're doing than the outside world, right? Because they have so much invested, so much time, labor, and everything else invested in just trying to bring a crop in or trying to raise, cattle or whatever else. They don't have a lot of time to sit here and diddle around with the bureaucratic nonsense that goes with all of this, right? They just don't. They don't have any patience for it, and I don't blame them.
Yeah.
I don't blame them at all.
They don't have the time, they don't have the money, even for those folks that are leaning in on it. I mean, at the end of the day, our farms aren't really fighting amongst themselves, big, small, medium necessarily all the time. But, the folks who do have the time for it are the very biggest. And even those big guys are still small operations. Some of the biggest farms in this country are still small businesses compared to the other businesses and other industries that they deal with or other industry sectors. So even the farmer who's got the most time and money on his hands is still the little guy compared to most of the corporations that are getting involved in our government, whether it's our trade deals or our government programs. So the farmer is just, like you said, and by the time you get to a small family farm, it's an extreme
Come
version of
on.
that. So the farmer's got too
Absolutely.
much work to do and too little time and too little money to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Before I close up, I'd like your thoughts on the whole immigration issue because there's been a lot of conjecture over, particularly in California, about people coming in to pick the crops and what that represents, so on and so forth. Has it had that massive an impact of what's going on to the small farmer with, collecting the illegals, if you will?
Yeah, I think the impact of that was somewhat mitigated by the administration. You saw them kind of wrestle publicly, honestly, with what to do, and I think they'd
Yeah.
probably describe it that way. You heard Trump say, "We wanna work with the farmers, we wanna figure out a way for them to have the workforce they need," and they were doing all of that while also talking about trying to prioritize focusing the activity around, criminal elements and stuff like that. And
Yeah,
I
the
know that
bad
it wasn't
guys.
all, yeah, I know that it
Yeah,
wasn't necessarily all that way. And the administration said that it couldn't necessarily all be from their standpoint, but between the focus and between the back and forth around what to do, there was discussion underway to try to find a solution for farmers. There were certainly farms that had their labor force displaced, but there was also a lot of farms that didn't. And I think it's still honestly an open question as this goes on. The reality is that we do get about half our workforce from immigrant labor in agriculture right now. And
sure.
so at some point, and look, farmers, there's a lot of people from rural areas, farmers who support securing our border. Not only do they support it, it might be one of the reasons they supported President Trump. And at the same time, they depend on immigrant labor. And the reason for that
Yeah.
is they want to have a secure border, but they know, a local worker that is here and has a legal status and they want to hire them. Or they think that person has legal status, but they don't know that they're not here legally because there's this whole industry, the coyotes, they not only traffic drugs, they traffic people. And so there are people who are brought in this country who appear legal to your average small business farmer or otherwise, and they aren't. So there is an answer to this. And the answer is to address the deeper issue of wiping out our farms. What I mean by that is if we keep this march toward get big or get out, relentlessly making farms get bigger or get out and disappear, what happens is you get great big operations that they've got to just do all they can to keep their labor costs low. And that's the name of the game. If we have more of our small family farms growing more meaningful parts of our food and they're growing entrepreneurial ventures, one of the best ways to have rising wages and improving situations where you could have not only people from Mexico or wherever else, but also Americans taking these jobs is to have rising wages from small businesses. That's how an economy grows. So if we solve this underlying issue of why our farms are getting wiped out and we have more small and medium-sized farms be growing entrepreneurial ventures again, we can have rising wages. That can relieve a lot of this problem. To say nothing of the fact that to one of your earlier points, if in Washington they roll up our sleeves and they figure out a way to secure the border and have a legal workforce through farm visa programs, stuff like that.
Yeah, some kind of work mechanism to
Yeah,
where, yeah, they can come and they can work or something. But that doesn't seem to be rocket science that you could set up, a labor distribution area that was fully recognized by both Mexico and the United States on what they're doing and everything, fit and benefit to the farmers that need the extra labor. But I agree with you that if you have like a 200-acre farm, your need for additional labor is probably pretty minimal depending on what you're trying to produce, right?
yeah. And like the
So,
farm I grew
but
up
then you
on is
get
about.
these mega.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I was just saying, like the farm I grew up on is 200 acres of work land. We used to be a medium-sized farm. Now we're a small farm by standards of today. We didn't have
Yeah,
immigrant labor on our farm. There were others who were
yeah,
bigger than us who did.
yeah, yeah. So, but to your point, you start squishing all of these small farms out of there, and you end up like a Tyson or somebody like that, where you've got to have cheap labor to do a lot of the activities that go on to keep your price point where it needs to be, right? So I agree with you. I think the solution is some kind of compelling situation where we start to rekindle, excuse me, that whole small farm genre that we gave up for the industrial revolution, which, like technology, is kind of ending up to be careful what you wish for, right?
That's right. And I always say to people,
Because
look,
you have dealing with all kinds of technological nuances that some of which are not very good.
yeah, that's right. I always tell people, look, in the book, we tell stories of our family farm surviving from the Depression to today, and we're not unique. We're unique in the sense that my family allowed me to tell an honest, raw story about it. We picked up our heads from the work to try to tell people what was going on in rural America. But most farm families have stories of survival like we do against tragic farm accidents and weather and economic upheaval. And all these farm families are holding on. So they're holding on. We've got nearly 2 million farms left, even though we lost 70% of them. And 96% of them are family farms. So we got nearly 2 million families holding on despite how we've really made it deliberately not work for them in this country. Imagine what they could accomplish if we let the economics work for them again. They could
Yeah,
solve
yeah.
all those issues.
If you actually put together a playbook that would allow them to prosper and innovate, yeah, it would be amazing.
That's
So
right.
how is the book doing, Brian?
Well, I appreciate it. It's been going really good. We actually just had our new paperback edition come out in the fall.
Cool.
And so it's good to have enough people picking up the book that we're able to do that. And
Great.
I'm very grateful. It's humbling for a farm boy such as myself, but for it to earn the awards that it did. Most recently, it was named Best Book Award for U.S. History, and it was a finalist for New Nonfiction for the year. So we're grateful that people care
Wow.
about the story. We're just
Wow.
happy.
Terrific. Well, we've been talking to Mr. Brian Reisinger, who's written the book Land Rich, Cash Poor, The Untold History of the Disappearing Farmer. And as always, Brian, it's been an absolute delight, a pleasure. Going forward, I wish you a very, very Merry Christmas, you and your family. Stay safe, stay warm, and enjoy the holidays.
Well, same to you, David. People can find Land Rich, Cash Poor, Amazon, anywhere else online, also bookstores nationwide. I'm grateful for anybody who just talks about these issues, and I'm grateful for you. Thanks for having me, and Merry Christmas to you and your family and
bet.
all your listeners.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to listen to more Clarity from Chaos shows on demand, go to clarityfromchaos.buzzsprout.com or send Dave an email at info@clarityfromchaos.com for information on previous shows. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, or Google Podcast. Until next time, please remember, it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Be well, everyone.